Stout, and this is Dr. Holly Diaz, and we're very excited to be here today, but also a little nervous. We are leadership studies experts, not Mongolian experts. So you know a lot of what we're talking about, perhaps better than we do. Anyways, we'll get started with our presentation. So why Mongolia? You heard earlier today that we have a wonderful, we're at Western Washington University, and we have this wonderful Mongolian studies collection. When we inherited and when we got that collection, the university was also donated a lot of money so that we could start to reignite Mongolian studies research between Western Washington University and Mongolia. So this is me, and I was part of the first ambassadorial team, faculty and students to go to Mongolia in recent times. We had sent a lot of university administrators to Mongolia, but we really needed to get on the ground and meet with people and understand where we might start engaging in research of students. So this team traveled for about 12 days, and we visited dozens of universities and nonprofits and NGOs and met with lots of people. And then we went back a second time in Holly and I, well, let me say, when I was there the first time, I met a wonderful university professor who told me a lot about what it's like to be a woman working in Mongolia, and she said a few things to me that just really sparked my interest. How many women work in white-collar positions, that while they may make up perhaps 85% of the workplace, there were no real sexual harassment kinds of laws or protections for women in the workplace. And she shared a variety of information, including that the wage gap is much smaller in Mongolia than in many other countries. So we found that very interesting, and I came back with Holly and this group of 8 students the next year to collect data. And Holly's going to tell you a little bit more about that.
Hello, everyone. So in summer of 2016, Karen and I led a study abroad to Mongolia, and the students were part of the research that we conducted, interviewing women leaders across sectors. We interviewed 14 women all together about their experiences being a leader in their field. Oftentimes they didn't identify themselves as such, but by what we know about leadership, they were and they are. We also spent time in the countryside, visited museums, other cultural events, and met with many other local leaders and nonprofits. There's our team out on the step. And then we had an opportunity the following summer. I went back in 2017 with one student and worked with the ACMS to further the research. I was able to validate 6 out of the 14 original interviews, go back to them and say, does this check out with you? And they're like, yes. We also interviewed an additional 10 women, and 4 women on the steppe on the countryside, which we hadn't done the first time, which was really a great experience. We have more data that we need to analyze, but for the purposes of this paper and exploring persistence, we are using the data from 14 participants.
So we used, we won't talk about it too much now for the sake of time, but we wanted to use an indigenous narrative approach. As white women from the United States going into Mongolia, we did not want to put any of our research frameworks on the women's experiences. We wanted to listen to their stories and then develop themes from those stories instead of putting a framework on top of it. So I'll kind of leave it at that right now. And then I'm going to flip this forward a number of slides. Keep going to find this. There you go. Wait, too far. There, okay. Well, for my slides. Okay, so sorry. We have so much data, we're only going to be able to cover some of the things today. So what we were really looking at with the women that we were interviewing was we wanted to know what it's like to be a Mongolian woman in the workplace. What are the struggles? What are the things that you're facing? Who do you go to for support? Who do you support? How do you engage in leadership? Who are you as leaders? So in doing this, and then we just listened to the women talk and tell their stories, which was really fascinating. So we're going to highlight some of those research findings, and we have lots of bullet points on here, but I'm just going to highlight a few on some of these slides. One of the things that we really appreciated about the women that we talked to women from a variety of industries, and many women were employed in different types. They were underemployed in some cases, and so many of them had multiple jobs, or they were working full time, plus they were an author, maybe they were running for government. They held 3, 4, 5, 6 jobs in ways that surprised Holly and I, in that we hold one job. And these women were pulling in money from a lot of resources. But they talked about that in terms of the history of the democracy in Mongolia and the challenges of who got laid off when the country democratized. And and they also talked, they were well aware of the economy and what was going on in the government. I would say perhaps better than a lot of American women. I mean, every woman we talked to was very aware of what was going on in the government and in the economy, and they had very specific opinions and insight about that. So one woman, for example, hypothesized that high unemployment rates make people violent and negative, and when you don't work, it's harder to overcome everyday challenges. One woman also talked about the challenge for Mongolia as a country, saying we don't manufacture anything and we don't have the knowledge how to manage our natural resources. And so they were expressing this frustration, but also by doing so, they were saying, I'm taking some responsibility for this. I see that it's part of my responsibility and our community's responsibility in challenging some of these problems. They also talked about health and infrastructure, including that the public health infrastructure wasn't up to global standards, and that many of them were talking about how they could help make that better. One woman was actually growing she was, one of her side jobs, amongst many other things, was growing plants from seeds in order to sell those plants so that people in the Gare community could start growing gardens. And that was just one of her 5 businesses, and she was 25 years old. It was blowing away our undergraduate students who were 21, 20 years old, and were trying to get one job, and here they're interviewing and talking to women that are holding 4 or 5 and very entrepreneurial. The women also talked about levels of education and differences between men and women, and they also talked about differences in how they mentor each other. But I'm going to stop there so Holly can go on.
We talked a lot with these women, like Karen was saying, about government structure and ethics. And specifically, one point that we wanted to bring to this particular group was unethical campaign and journalism practices, with examples, many examples of politicians buying votes and influencing media with money, and a deep fear around safety. A couple of women politicians that we interviewed had their windows smashed, were taken down in the media, and their relationships were put front and center. They were worried for their children's safety. And so that was a huge component of what they talked about.
Can I also add here?
Yes.
One of the women that we spoke to was a journalist. She was very concerned for her safety, had left the journalism work because of that concern. Just before we went back to collect our data, a female journalist was killed because of her writing against the mining industry. And there was no real investigation into her death, and she was, and it seemed that so many people just accepted that that was okay, and that was really silencing for a lot of women.
In addition, it was impossible not to talk with them about and hear about the transition to democracy and socialism and the significant impact on their lives. And even though we've read about it, but hearing their stories of when the economy collapsed in the 90s and the elderly and women were first to be laid off, that they were not psychologically ready for that. Not only were they not working, but they were also socially isolated from change and the development. And many of them then talked about, and we still got involved. we created the non-governmental structures, and we did this, and it looked different across the entire spectrum of women from different sectors, but it was very consistent of how they not only were involved at that point in time, but how they stayed involved as a result. Back to gender equity in the politics. They also talked about women running RFA on social media, criticized for their private life, and the balancing of campaign, families, work, and volunteering. While they really believed the importance behind it, they also, several women talked to us about how their children were mad at them because they were not around as much as the children wanted them to be. And so they were balancing, I know I feel that sometimes, but not to the same extent these women were. They were balancing many different roles and responsibilities. And work-life balance. Perfect segue into work-life balance. So many of the women we had interviewed were divorced single parents, which they felt a lot of pressure from. Several talked about domestic violence. As a result of, the divorce was as a result of domestic violence, and how those rates had gone up since the Democratic transition. And single moms struggle from a lack of support, emotional scars, resentment, and a deep distrust in men.
So I'm going to take this back one. Our last bullet point here, a few women brought up in our interviews that they were frustrated that there were some awards. Women's merit was based on the number of children that they birthed, specifically that there were some renowned mother awards, and that a lot of mothers were really bothered by that because they weren't being seen as anything other than making babies and their contributions to society. When women were in the workplace, they talked of a lot of lack of advancement opportunities. So while I had originally heard that 85% of the white collar workers in Mongolia are women, almost every woman said, while that may be true, there's always a man at the top. So it doesn't matter how great we are at our jobs, there's always there socially needs to be a man at the top. And a lot of women expressed a lot of frustration with that, as well as how they were treated in the workplace, including that women were often, Mongolian women, United States women, often the same, were too emotional, right? We can't ever express emotion in the workplace. So when women were considered to be too emotional, they were expected to have a cool head. But if they did have a cool head and were able to control their emotions, then they were seen as aloof and cold. And that wasn't acceptable either. So many women were feeling this push and pull between what was expected of them and who they really felt that they were. We just wanted to say authentic in air quotes, and I will agree to that, with who they were authentically felt like they were. This is very similar for a lot of US women. One of the other challenges that men are allowed to boast in the workplace and women are not, as well as contradictions that women. A few women brought up that women are seen as pure and sacred, and yet they're not pure and sacred enough to go into certain bodies of water and into certain places. So if we're so wonderful, then why aren't we so wonderful that we can go everywhere that men can go? And again, those women reinforced for us that there were really very few sexual harassment policies or laws to protect women. They might exist, but they're not really reinforced. So laws are on the books, but women through sexual assault outside or inside of the workplace aren't necessarily as supported as they felt that they should be. Hopefully we're skipping this one. Oh, I'm still talking. Okay. Women also talked about navigating a variety of challenges effectively in the workplace. And there were several themes from these interviews. So women knew that they needed to develop strong skill sets, and leaders always need to develop strong skill sets, and these women talked about that. They also talked about the importance of communication. And one woman said, "An animal moves with the help of their legs. Humans do this with language, and this is how we will move forward." And I have to say, we had students sitting around the table, and when the women we were interviewing were dropping wonderful statements like that, our students were blown away. It was very inspiring to our students. And if I can add this in here, what was also inspiring to Holly and I was that these women that we were interviewing cared about our students, and they were like asking our students questions, and they were wanting to pull our students into the conversation in terms of being like teachers and leaders for them, which we thought was really remarkable. Another person, and they really focused a lot on this notion of integrity for themselves and teaching that in their children and in the workplace. And one woman said, if competitors are making mistakes, I will help teach them because that's the right thing to do, even though they were a competitor. They thought that notion of integrity was really important. There were a lot of challenges for these women to face, including using this, in facing these challenges, they had to use a variety of strategies. So some women talked about the strategy of having male colleagues present with them or be with them when they're trying to get their ideas across, so that others might hear them better. They also talked about mentoring and learning from the younger generation. Mentorship was very important to the women that we interviewed. We set up 17 interviews, but often the women that we interviewed brought 1 or 2 young women with them. They were their daughters or the women who were living in their houses. A number of women talked about how they help manage their work-life balance is to have young college-age women come live with them. And one woman lived in a 3-story house, and her Australian husband was like, "You're going to clean this house." And she said, "I have so many jobs, I have other things to do. If you think I'm cleaning this house, you're crazy." And she moved 3 young women into the house, 1 woman on each floor. And the women lived there rent-free. They were able to go to school. The women helped pay their college bills. And those women now had an opportunity to get an education. And she mentored them. And she brought those women with her to this interview, expecting that interacting with professors from the United States and with meeting other college students would be helpful for their development. And so there were important conversations about mentorship and development between the women and the women who we were interviewing and then the young mentors that they had. Let's see. I think that's probably it there.
We also talked extensively with these women about sustainability and the importance of building as they're working towards a better future and being part of the better future, that it needs to be sustainable. And so some of the points that they talked about in our interviews was the importance of diversification in the economy, that decision makers need to be educated, essentially, to understand the rules of the game and the region. Management for mining and husbandry and agriculture was needed. Help the people of Mongolia learn how to make their work useful, their skill sets useful. Look at best practices, but they need to make sense for Mongolia. And that it's critical to know the environment and the social norms. We're running a little low on time. I want to make sure that we have enough time for our colleague Sandra. But one point I want to point out in this particular slide is a quote that a woman shared that says, "Our country will improve when the public can take care of themselves." And that really was a theme throughout all of the interviews, many of these particular interviewees had traveled out of the country to be educated. Many had multiple degrees, had come back to Mongolia with the sole purpose to contribute to the future of Mongolia. And so their intention was, we gotta spread this good in order for the future to be sustainable.
So we just have a couple of conclusions we'll leave you with. Like I said, we wanted to hear the women's stories. We did not put our research frameworks in order to analyze these. But what we found was when the women were talking, we could use almost what they were saying as like a checklist. Oh, according to servant leadership research, they are demonstrating servant leadership. According to resilience research, they're demonstrating resiliency. And so what we found was that these women were incredibly resilient. They kept picking themselves up when they would get metaphorically knocked down, and they were always thinking about how can I make my community better? How can I serve people around me to make this a better community? They were also very mindful. They valued mindfulness, they valued their relationships, they valued engagement with others, as demonstrated by bringing the young women that they were mentoring into these interviews themselves. And they talked about the importance of making formal and informal relationships to affect change, especially in Mongolian society. That yes, we need to do legal work, make laws and changes, but we also need to do a variety of social work. And we found a lot of examples of that in the women and the several nonprofits that they developed that supported women's issues. They were also very authentic and culturally resilient. Authentic leadership is a great, very popular buzzword right now. There are some interesting challenges in thinking about how that gets constructed and researched. But these women, the notion of authenticity that we really go with is that notion of you are who you say you are. You're not showing one thing and then behaving differently. And that's what these women demonstrated to us all the time. And they were incredibly culturally resilient. They relied on the Mongolian history as a way of inspiring them for their future. And that we'd love to take some questions. So we really appreciated this opportunity, and we're looking forward to going back. Holly and I are planning on going back hopefully in summer of 2025 so we can collect some more research. COVID, the pandemic, really we had to put this on hold, and we're coming back to it now. So this is us trying to get back into this research. So we're really pleased about being here today, and we'll take any questions or advice or suggestions that you have. Thank you.